Quicksilver Messenger Service. So anyway, David was a very nice fellow, young man, and he introduced me his attorney and his manager, and I started meeting attorneys and meeting agents and meeting managers. And then all of a sudden he said, well, why don't you come over, there's a rehearsal for the Grateful Dead, and they're going to play The Matrix, and I want you to meet some of the people with the Grateful Dead. And so all of a sudden I'm meeting everybody. And so that, again, I had my own pocket with some bucks in it, because I'd always worked as a young kid from 10 years old up to the age of going in the military and going to college and acting school and all that. I always had 3 jobs, so money wasn't an issue with me. I had money. I always had a savings account. So then at the Matrix, there's this guy had a cape on. He had this kind of wild cape on and very wild looking. And I asked David, I says, who's he? He says, well, that's Matthew Cates. He has a band called the Jefferson Airplane. I said, well, I've heard of them. He says, yeah, well, they got that song White Rabbit, and Marty Ballin and Gracie Slick. And I says, are they going to be here? He says, yeah, they're sitting right over there. He says, well, can you introduce me to him? I says, I want to meet this Matthew Cates. And he said, yeah, I'll introduce you to him. And so I met with Matt, and then Matt invited me a couple weeks later to come by his house, and he had a fabulous house in San Francisco up in Pacific Heights. And he was a member of a club, what's called a press club downtown, where I wanted to become a member so I could go in and get saunas, and they had a nice bar. And normally in those days, the private clubs, drinks were cheaper than going to a normal bar. You rather than pay $6, you'd pay $3, or with the $3, you'd pay $1.50. And then there's a kind of a interesting clientele. Press club, you'd meet writers from the San Francisco Chronicle. In this case, I met the rock critic from the Chronicle very quickly. I have an art, a way of meeting people. So the airplane deal turned out to be quite good, because then I got invited to a couple of the shows, and then I got to know Marty, and then his father is Joe Ballin, and I get along sometimes with the fathers too. I'm not trying to hustle anybody, but I was smart enough. I wasn't out trying to take anybody for anything, and I started going to the Fillmore West, which Bill Graham ran, and I was going to the committee. The committee was up in North Beach, and Bill Graham was part of the committee. That's where he learned. That was a comedy world, and then there was another fellow up there that will come to me that was quite a fellow that Bill represented, and then Bill went and started the Fillmore West. So I went to the first show of the Cream there when the Cream arrived day 1 from England. First show of Carlos Santana. These shows were normally on a Sunday for the first time bands, and they normally, I'd get there like, late in the afternoon on Sunday, and I would be there kind of for the early part of the show, and then sometimes I'd have to deadhead back to the base, which was about a 3-hour drive from San Francisco back to Monterey. And then the times that I could squeeze in the extra day, then I would stay overnight, and I'd stay for the whole night's set, But Bill kind of liked me a little bit because I was friendly, and I remember I used to give him a little extra money for my ticket. And so he said, well, why don't you come in for the sound check since you have to go back to the base, because I explained my situation to him. So that's why I'd able to get in the building a little early, and then I could see a guy like Eric Clapton show up with his long snakeskin boots up to here, and sexy fucker, thin, skinny, had his shit together. Then obviously the Cream turned out to be a rather interesting band, and still are. And they wound up working for me at the Eagles Auditorium. All these bands that I met with in San Francisco, as a few years went by, worked for me at the Eagles Auditorium, and then worked for me in Vancouver, BC, in Portland, Oregon, at the Crystal Ballroom, at the Coliseum. I put the show on at the Portland Coliseum, which was like the Seattle Coliseum, which is now the Key Arena, Key Coliseum or whatever. The arena, I did shows at the Seattle Arena also, but that was 6,000. But the Coliseums, that's where I did Jimi Hendrix, they were more like 12,000.